Welcome back to Christian Parenting, raising your kids for heaven. We've been talking about how you as parents can enhance your child's intelligence. Our guest has been Dr. Neil Nedley. Welcome back.
Thank you,
We've been talking about different things that parents can do to actually enhance their child's intelligence, different foods that help to do that. But are there certain foods that actually decrease intelligence?
There is. Arachidonic acid is present primarily in flesh foods, and it decreases the synthesis and storage of acetylcholine. That's an important neurotransmitter that's there to help us analyze information. It's used extensively in the frontal lobe. And so meat does not come out on top as far as enhancing IQ is concerned.
So, in other words, the diet that most enhances intelligence is a vegetarian diet?
Actually, there are studies indicating that, and there's also another very interesting study that was just published recently in the British Medical Journal showing that the opposite is also true, and that is that if you have a high IQ at age 10, you're more likely to become a vegetarian by the time you're age 30. In fact, this was a study of 8,000 men and women at age 30. This was a long-term study because their IQs had been measured at age 10. And it showed that the higher the IQ, the greater the odds of becoming a vegetarian. In fact, for each 15-point rise in IQ, the likelihood of being a vegetarian rose by 38%. And so what this means is because the data is coming out showing that a plant-based diet doesn't help physically, mentally, it actually enhances your life, that people with high IQ are more likely to pick up on that and change as a result.
Wow. Well, we've spoken about diet then. What are some of the other things that enhance intelligence?
Well, this is also something very recent that has been shown in the medical literature, and that is healthy lungs, healthy brain. And it showed for children, healthy lungs mean healthy scores on tests of memory, learning, and intelligence. These were researchers from Harvard University. They studied 165 Boston children who had been followed since birth. And at the age of 6, the children had their lung function tested, their lung capacity. At age 9, they completed standard tests of memory, learning ability, and intelligence. And the researchers found that for each increase in the children's lung function performance, there was a corresponding increase in their intelligence or cognitive test scores. And so this means that we can actually enhance our child's intelligence by actually enhancing their lung function. And so this means posture is important. It also means deep breathing exercises in children are important. In fact, there's evidence showing that if we just do 30 minutes of deep breathing exercises in children as part of their school, it will actually enhance their ability to learn and retain the knowledge and even apply the knowledge.
So if I understand you correctly, it's not so much the size of the lungs itself, but it's how well we use our lungs.
Exactly. It's and of course that gets into lung capacity. And so these deep breathing exercises, in fact, adults, those that are in the peak mental performance area, will even teach athletes to do this. And I noticed it the other day when I happened to be seeing a baseball game in a patient room that went by. The bases were loaded. It was a tense moment. And the crowd was really into it. And this pitcher goes to the back of the mound and does deep breathing. And he's trying to enhance everything about him, including his mental performance, because he needs that mental acuity to get it right in the right spot. And so even athletes are utilizing this, but if they're utilizing it, we should really have our children learn this and actually see that that habit becomes established. It's not just during exercise that we should be deep breathing, just periodically taking 3 or 4 really deep breaths and trying to focus in on that can help our mind.
Well, let's talk about another area, hypnosis. Now, probably for a lot of people, they think, oh, you know what, I'm never going to go to someone and be hypnotized. But first of all, let's talk about what hypnosis does in reference to brain function and intelligence, and then we'll see how that affects a lot more than we realize.
Well, hypnosis by design actually attempts to cancel out frontal lobe functions and bring people into a trance in which they are highly suggestible. And a lot of people actually do go to hypnotists to try to quit smoking or some medical cause or reason, etc. We don't recommend that because we want to enhance the frontal lobe. not detract from it, but hypnosis is going to cause a decline in frontal lobe function. In fact, actually by design, it does that.
Now, how does that actually work? What's the best way to hypnotize someone?
Well, we can hypnotize people a lot of different ways, but the easiest way to hypnotize someone is by having their eyes focused in on one object, and that best object is a little flickering light. And after so long, usually a few seconds to at most a few minutes, the individual is going to be in a hypnotic trance.
Now, the reason we said at the beginning, folks might think, well, I'm not affected by hypnosis, but it seems to me that there is a device in almost every home that might end up hypnotizing the people in the home.
Absolutely, John, and that is a little flickering light that we tend to focus in on to get entertained. And what produces that flicker is the scene of reference change. Entertainment television changes its scene of reference every 3 seconds on the average. And of course, commercials will even speed it up that much more. And studies show that what happens is when we sit down in front of our favorite television program, at 90 seconds to at most 3 minutes, the individual is in alpha wave rhythm on their EEG. We could take anyone in this audience here tonight, sit them in front of their favorite television program, hook them up to EEG, and it would take 3 minutes maximum for them to be in alpha wave rhythm. Alpha wave rhythm, they're still taking in all the information, but they're not critically analyzing that information as to whether it should be accepted or rejected or not. Their emotions are still working. They can laugh and cry with the scene, but it's not going into the appropriate subsets where it's going to really help our ability to analyze in the future.
Now, you used the phrase, you said entertainment television. Is there a certain type of television that does this more so than other? Is everything on television then bad?
No, because what you're watching right now, you may be watching on television if you're not here as part of the live audience. And if you'll notice here, they're not using the rapid scene of reference change. The scene of reference is not changing every 3 seconds. It might be 30 seconds. It might be 40 seconds. And if we change the scene of reference slowly, we actually can keep the frontal lobe fully involved, and so there's no hypnotic effect going on. What makes you stare and keep your eyes focused, where you can get into hypnotism, is the rapid scene. And then the other thing is when your eyes are diverting around, you can think about, you know what, I agree with that. Where you're not actually analyzing whether you agree or disagree when you're being hypnotized. That's not something that even enters into your mind.
Let's talk about TV and children as far as their academic performance.
Well, I should mention this. There have been 3,000 studies done on the effect of entertainment television in the mind. Over 300 books have been written on the subject, and they all show a decline in frontal lobe function. There's a decline in their interest in learning. There's a decline in their interest in reading. There's a decline in their IQ scores, both at age 3 and at age 11. There's a decrease in their academic performance, that is their GPA. There's a decrease in their discernment. There's an increase in their daydreaming. That's not a good thing. And there's a decrease in their creativity. And of course, that also is not a good thing. And those are just several of the 17 ways that the frontal lobe went down. Studies also showed, as far as TV and success in school, the more TV adolescents watch, the more likely they are to develop attention and learning problems and to do poorly in school in the long term. The amount of TV kids watched when they were 14 was positively linked with having attention problems later, not doing homework, being bored at school, not finishing high school, and hating school, the researchers found. 14-year-olds who added one more daily hour of TV doubled their risk of academic failure at age 16. And so this isn't just at age 3 and age 11. It actually is important even what 14-year-olds are doing as far as TV is concerned, and you can double that child's risk of failure by giving them just one more hour of TV a day.
Now, you had mentioned that there are a number of secular psychologists who work with children that actually recommend no television for children up to the age of 2.
That's true. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends no TV up to age 2. But there are people who have done the studies, these secular researchers, who are now recommending that no entertainment television prior to age 12. Actually, this study that I just quoted you was on 14-year-olds. And so it is true that after age 12, we can kind of discern what is true, what isn't so true. Before that, it's very confusing to a child. It increases their limbic system, their emotional reaction to things, and decreases their frontal lobe performance. And so it's very critical for people under the age of 12 to just have it be avoided by parents. And that means it's incumbent on us parents to really come up with activities that are fun things to do for children that are going to enhance and not detract from their frontal lobe performance.
Let's talk about music. And you've got good music, you've got bad music. How do the two groups of music affect intelligence?
Well, all music, whether it's good or bad, enters the brain through the emotional regions, which include the temporal lobe and limbic system. And from there, some kinds of music tend to produce a positive frontal lobe response that influences the will, moral worth, and the reasoning power. However, there is a type of music that does detract from the frontal lobe, and it tends to produce a hypnotic effect. And that's your syncopated rock and roll rhythms that are very prevalent among all ages today, but particularly among the baby boomer ages and less. And this is the problem that the baby boom generation has passed along to other generations. In fact, I know baby boomers who are so militant about feeding the type of music that they enjoyed, the syncopated rock and roll to their young ones. And it actually is not helping their mental performance.
You spoke about television. You speak about this form of music. Not only are they bad for brain development, but they can be also very addictive.
And that's a good point. A lot of people don't recognize that. This stuff is addictive. Rock music is addictive. Entertainment television is addictive. In fact, when we withdraw kids from it, there's some kids that will go into super hyperactivity and not be able to hardly function unless they're put on a program, a 5-day plan to stop listening to rock music. And you'll see this among a large group of teenagers. If they're a large group of teenagers in a public school system and they're in a controlled environment where they have to sit and wait for a long period of time, they can't do it unless they pipe in the rock music because of that addictive component. Their neurochemistry gets to the irritability stage if they don't have that music on board. And the problem is it's harming them, and it's addictive as well. Mm-hmm. And so they really need to be on a mental performance program where this addiction is gotten rid of.
What about the brain being a muscle? You've heard that before. We need to exercise our muscles. Do we need to exercise our brain?
We do. Just like a muscle, if we don't use it, we're going to lose it. Mm-hmm. And so the brain needs to be exercised in order to get optimal performance.
So, how do we exercise the brain? How do we strengthen brain function?
Well, one of the ways is reading books that stimulate thought. Fiction is what most prefer to read, but it's hardly useful for enhancing the thought process, according to a number of studies. Reading books which are mentally challenging will help you improve your ability to read and to write. Classics will improve your vocabulary, which also has to do with IQ. I tell people never to ignore the words that they don't understand when they're reading books that are mentally challenging. Look them up. It actually does enhance their IQ to do so. In fact, every IQ test has a vocabulary section. And so don't skip over those. Look up their meanings and then put all your effort in understanding the paragraphs which appear complicated. Sometimes you might have to read them over and over again until you understand the full depth. Cultivate that habit and you'll soon be able to grasp any complicated subject.
Well, on that description that you gave us as to what type of books we should be reading, if you could just pick one book that would enhance mental performance, what book would that be?
Well, that's a very good question, but I would pick the Bible. Mm-hmm. And as a means of intellectual training, the Bible is more effective than any other book or all other books combined. Why is that? The greatness of its themes, the dignified simplicity of its utterances, the beauty of its imagery quicken and uplift the thoughts as nothing else can. No other study can impart such mental power as does the effort to grasp the stupendous truths of Revelation. The mind thus brought in contact with the thoughts of the infinite cannot but expand and strengthen.
So spend time in the Word.
Spend time in the Word. And not just merely reading it, but trying to grasp it, trying to understand it. That's why even the King James Version can actually give you a little bit of an IQ advantage. If you simplify it too much, you don't have to look up words, you don't have to try to understand the depths of its meaning. And those things are very enhancing.
So what can we as parents do now to enhance our children's intelligence?
Well, I would ask every parent here, and every child and everyone watching. If you have a desire to enhance your intelligence, to be more analytical, better discerning, or make better decisions, think about your life, what you're doing as far as habits are concerned. Think what you can do to change those daily habits to be habits that are going to enhance your brain performance. And by doing so, you can make a dramatic difference.
Now, we've got a perfect example in the Bible of some people who did just that. They were determined to do what God wanted them to do, and in turn, they were greatly blessed.
Exactly. Daniel chapter 1. I mean, they had the king's food available to them. They had the king's drink. They had all of this royal stuff. And people say, well, we don't have that royal stuff around. But, you know, I still see Burger Kings around. And I see Dairy Queens. And I see Imperial Margarine and all of this royal food. And we can reject that royal food and do what those 4 boys did. And that is choose plant foods that are going to be healthy for their brain. And they looked better after 10 days. They were healthier. But after a year and a half, their mental acuity was 10 times better than anyone else around. And so the long-term effects of that can be some very sharp mental performance.
Well, we've spoken about IQ, or intelligence. What about EQ, emotional intelligence?
You know, that's just as important, but in a different way. Your job out of college is related to your IQ, but how far you advance in that job is not at all related to your IQ. It's related strictly to your EQ, or your emotional intelligence. Your happiness in life is not related to IQ. It's related to EQ. Your success in life is related to both. And so we really need to be working on enhancing our child's emotional intelligence as well.
Well, let me ask you, is there a relationship between IQ and EQ? In other words, people who have a higher IQ, do they typically have a higher EQ?
No, they're independent. And so you can have an individual with a high EQ that doesn't have a very high IQ, and the other way around. And so they are separate, and in fact, that's why some IQ people don't succeed. EQ has to do with motivation as well. There's actually 5 components to EQ. It's knowing our emotions, managing our emotions, recognizing emotions in others, managing relationships with others, and motivating ourselves to achieve our goals. And if you don't have motivation, the highest IQ in the world isn't going to do you any good.
If you look at the two, IQ and EQ, what has the biggest impact on our spirituality?
EQ.
EQ does.
Yeah, EQ does. We need IQ in order to be able to understand some of the deeper things, some of the deeper spiritual things. But EQ is more directly related to spirituality.
Now, you touched on a few of the advantages of having a high EQ, but can you share with us a few more?
Well, yes, you'll think clearer, you'll communicate more effectively, you'll actually foster unity in group settings. Some high IQ people do the opposite of that. That's because they don't have the EQ. It reduces polarizing statements. It'll help them live happier lives, and all of this is accomplished without compromise or sacrificing the truth. In fact, EQ is based on what is true. People with high EQ are interested in having things true and undistorted. In other words, not polarized.
How can we then enhance our child's emotional intelligence?
Well, you know, interestingly, diet has a role to play here as well. Omega-3 is critically important in improving the EQ. The diet that helps IQ also is the diet that helps EQ. But even more important than diet is to analyze our thoughts. You know, emotions have to do with feelings. And our feelings are resulting from the thoughts that we have. In fact, our thoughts have much more to do with how we're feeling than even what is happening in our life. And so how we improve EQ is to analyze our thoughts, to try to recognize distortions in those thoughts. If there are distortions, to then rethink the thought into an accurate thought and then practice that. And when we do that, we'll develop a high emotional intelligence.
Let's talk a little more about distorted thinking. Give us some examples of how that would work, and how would you rectify distorted thinking?
Well, you know, there's 10 commandments in the Bible, and there's 10 ways of distorted thinking. And in our book, The Lost Art of Thinking, we go into all of these extensively and give examples. But we have, for instance, overgeneralization. And overgeneralization came from a sweet mate who said after the girl that he had his eye on turned him down, I'm going to be lonely and miserable the rest of my life. He was overgeneralizing. He assumed because she turned him down once, she was always going to turn him down. But then he assumed that 100% of eligible women had identical taste to hers, and thus he would be endlessly rejected the rest of his life. That's overgeneralization. Now, generalization is part of IQ. We have to generalize to score well on IQ tests, but when we overgeneralize, we're actually distorting it. And that's when we get into lack of EQ.
Now, let's just use that for example. We overgeneralize something. Do we believe it? I mean, sometimes we just say things, but does it really have an impact upon how we feel?
It does, yeah, because I can tell you in his case, he believed it. I mean, the look on his face and all of that. Sometimes we might say things somewhat as a joking way or maybe opposite or something. But most of the things people say, it's because they at least have an 80% belief in what they're saying. And as they say it, it actually strengthens that thought and strengthens that belief. And it can get you into trouble. I mean, it can cause depression, anxiety, all sorts of things when we lack emotional intelligence and when we're thinking thoughts that are not clearly true.
So how do we redirect those thoughts?
Well, we have to recognize the distortions in that thought, and then we have to then rethink the thought in an accurate way. And so in his case, he needed to tell himself, no, I'm not going to be lonely and miserable the rest of my life. Remind himself that she just turned him down once. Mm-hmm. And also, even if she was going to turn him down ad infinitum, there are other women out there that might be more suited to him.
So when we're talking about our children and how we can increase their emotional intelligence, we need to be aware of when they start to overgeneralize.
Exactly. Yeah, in fact, I have taught my children all 10 of these cognitive distortions. They'll catch them in me sometimes, and of course they have a lot of fun when they think that I have distorted something in my statement. But I have fun with that too, and of course it becomes a discussion point. And I think it's something all our children can learn, is the common ways that human beings tend to distort their thoughts and how to correct them.
So in our working with children, we want to be aware of this. We want to listen to what they have to say. We want to try and be a guide.
Try to be a guide,
so
absolutely.
So becoming a clear understanding of truth,
exactly.
What it is that they need to do.
And what children tend to do is they tend to utilize their filter, their mental filter. In fact, that's another cognitive distortion where they just look at one aspect of it, and they're not seeing the whole picture. That's a mental filter. And when we get into that mental filter role, it decreases our EQ.
What's the best way to deal with that type of a mental filter?
Well, often the mental filter is a negative mental filter. Mm-hmm. And so we have to just ask, is there anything positive about this? And they'll often say, no, nothing positive, nothing at all. Well, what about this? Well, okay, well, let's see if you can come up with whatever. And so, they can start realizing that there's a whole lot more to this picture that they haven't looked at.
There's a verse that comes to mind when I listen to you. It says, we need to overcome evil with good. Could that be true when we're talking about our thinking patterns?
Absolutely. We need to overcome our evil thoughts, which are really distorted thoughts, with thoughts that are good, which are going to be true thoughts.
And we get those true thoughts from the Word of God as our foundation.
That's the foundation of truth.
As we begin to build. Now, if you could pick one verse that sort of summarizes emotional intelligence, what verse would you pick?
Well, I think this verse would certainly be up there in the top. Whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, if there be any virtue and if there be any praise, think on these things. It's kind of interesting. Paul talked about what is true, honest, just. Those are the first three things. Mm-hmm. And he said we need to think on those things. And that means we need to think about our thoughts to make sure our thoughts are aligning up with those three items.
Now, in parenting, when we do this, is we listen to our children, the tendency is just to sort of say, it's just kids. They're just saying whatever they want to say. But if we're going to take this seriously, we want to listen to what our children are saying and stop and ask ourselves the question, are they believing these things, these distorted thoughts? And then we need to go back and try and help them see reality, help them see the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. And if they actually start to honor and respect what is true and undistorted, you're well on your way for that kid to have a very high EQ. And it's very gratifying to see their love of what is true start to develop.
Now, as parents, should we just assume that they're going to develop a healthy emotional intelligence if we just kind of provide a nurturing environment, or do we have to be a little more actively engaged in helping them in their thinking pattern? how they reason.
Yeah, we have to provide the nurturing environment, but in the same time, we have to be engaged with them. As I told you, my oldest is 16, and I seem to think when I was parenting early on, all I have to do is provide the nurturing environment. He's just going to automatically be able to see what is true and what isn't. Not true. And when he was getting older, I'm thinking, how in the world can he think that? I've provided this nurturing environment. What is this? And really, it helped me to see that I needed to get more engaged and help him to be able to recognize that a lot of what he was thinking at that age was indeed distorted. And it's starting to turn around.
And we only learn that by spending time with our children.
Absolutely.
Doing different things, activities, going places, just talking to them, communicating with them.
And even working with them. Try to find things where you can actually work with them. Playing with them is important early on, but as they get older, working with them will help to bring out distortions in their thoughts, even when they hate the work. When they start saying statements about this and that, you can stop there and make that a teaching moment for them.
There's a verse in Proverbs that talks about the value and importance of wisdom.
Yes, I like it. It says, "For wisdom is better than rubies, and all the things that may be desired are not to be compared to it." So if you have the chance of becoming the richest man in the world, or the richest woman in the world, or the chance to improve your wisdom, reject the money and improve your wisdom. It is going to be much more satisfying than all of the money in the world.
And of course, that's not only a blessing in this life, but more importantly, that's the secret to providing for the life to come.
Absolutely.
It's through the wisdom that comes from above. It's through an understanding of truth. It's through accepting Jesus as our personal Savior that we have the promise of eternal life. And that's really what this life is all about.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and sharing with us practical ways on how we can strengthen our children's intelligence as well as their emotional intelligence. Thank you again, friends, for joining us in this series, Christian Parenting. We trust that it's been a blessing to you as we've looked at different aspects that affect our children, and most importantly, how we can provide that environment and that instruction that'll prepare them for heaven. God bless.